Hello, Scorpio. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for being here and spending a little of your time with me. As I started sitting with your energy before laying these cards down, there was this quiet feeling that kept returning. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was more like someone trying to silence a song that keeps playing in the back of their mind. No matter how much they try to distract themselves, your energy continues to find its way back to them. So let's see where this reading wants to take us. The very first card that comes forward is the Five of Cups. This feels like someone who has been carrying far more regret than they would ever admit out loud. They may appear composed when other people are around. They may even look like they've moved on with their life. But underneath that calm exterior, it feels like there are so many conversations they replay over and over again. Things they wish they had said, moments they wish they had handled differently. It almost feels like they keep asking themselves the same question. What if I hadn't let Scorpio walk away quite so easily? What's interesting is that this doesn't feel like someone who suddenly woke up one morning with these emotions. It seems much slower than that, almost as if every day they tried to ignore you. Another piece of their heart quietly reminded them that the story wasn't actually over. Then the Page of Swords appears, and honestly, I wasn't surprised to see it. This card carries this energy of curiosity that refuses to disappear. I get the sense this person still checks on you somehow. Maybe they look at your social media. Maybe they ask mutual friends about you without making it obvious. Maybe they simply wonder what you're doing when everything becomes quiet at night. Whatever the situation may be, your name still crosses their mind much more often than they expected. The funny thing is, Scorpio, they don't even seem to understand why they're doing it anymore. At first, they probably convinced themselves they were only curious. Then they told themselves it didn't mean anything. But curiosity slowly became attachment. Attachment became longing. And longing became something much harder to hide. Okay, here's where everything starts becoming even more emotional. The Four of Swords carries this quiet silence between you. It doesn't necessarily mean nobody is thinking about the connection. Actually, it feels quite the opposite. Sometimes silence says far more than words ever could. I almost feel this person having imaginary conversations with you inside their own mind. They picture what they would say if you suddenly appeared in front of them. They imagine apologizing. They imagine explaining themselves. They imagine hearing your voice again. Yet every time they think about reaching out, something inside them freezes. Fear seems to become louder than courage. So instead of speaking, they stay silent. Instead of moving forward, they wait. And while they wait, those emotions only become heavier. Then we arrive at the Devil. Now, I'm not seeing this card as something frightening here. Instead, it feels incredibly personal. There is an attachment they haven't been able to break. It almost feels like they believed enough time would erase what they felt for you. They probably thought distance would help. Maybe keeping themselves busy would help. Maybe meeting other people would help. But somehow, every road seems to circle back to Scorpio. Maybe it's hearing a certain song. Maybe it's driving past a familiar place. Maybe it's catching someone else's smile and realizing it doesn't feel the same. Little by little, they begin comparing everyone they meet to the connection they experienced with you. And that comparison rarely feels fair, because nobody seems to awaken the same depth inside them. You know, Scorpio, one thing keeps standing out as I sit with this energy. This person may have spent a long time convincing themselves they were protecting their heart. They acted distant. They kept their emotions hidden. They wore confidence almost like armor. But armor becomes incredibly heavy when you're carrying it every single day. It feels like they're getting tired. Tired of pretending they don't care. Tired of acting unaffected. Tired of convincing themselves that losing you wasn't a big deal. Because the deeper truth seems much harder to ignore now. It feels like your energy stayed with them in ways they never expected. Not because you chased them, not because you demanded their attention, but because there was something about your presence that quietly settled into their soul. Perhaps it was the way you understood them without asking too many questions. Perhaps it was the way they felt accepted around you. Or maybe it was simply the feeling of peace they never fully appreciated until it was gone. Whatever the reason may be, those emotions don't seem buried anymore. They seem awake. And from where I'm sitting with these cards today, it feels like someone is slowly realizing that running away from their feelings has only led them right back to the place they were trying to escape. Your heart. The Seven of Cups is quietly stepping into the reading, and this card carries an energy that feels incredibly complicated. It seems like this person spent a long time standing in the middle of too many voices. Some belong to family, some may have come from friends, others may have come from old fears they never truly healed. Whatever the source was, it feels like they kept looking outside themselves for answers instead of listening to what their own heart had been whispering all along. I keep seeing someone who wanted everyone else to approve of their decisions. They may have worried about appearances. They may have wondered what people would think if they followed this connection completely. Instead of trusting what they felt whenever they were around you, they allowed doubt to become louder than their own intuition. It feels like every opinion they accepted pulled them a little farther away from what genuinely made them happy. The strange thing is that those outside voices don't seem nearly as convincing anymore. Life has a way of creating enough distance for us to recognize which advice actually helped us, and which advice quietly led us away from ourselves. Justice enters the reading with such a calm but undeniable presence. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels honest. Almost like standing in front of a mirror that reflects not only actions but intentions as well. I get the sense this person has started asking themselves questions they avoided for a very long time. What was I actually afraid of? Why did I push away someone who was trying to understand me? Why did I believe everyone else's version of this connection before believing my own experience? Those questions don't always receive immediate answers. Sometimes they simply stay with us until we're willing to face them. Okay, this energy feels deeply reflective. Rather than blaming other people the way they may have done before, it seems they're beginning to recognize their own choices. That's a difficult place to arrive because taking responsibility often feels heavier than placing blame somewhere else. Yet there is something quietly healing about this realization. It may not erase the past, but it allows someone to stop running from it. The Six of Cups appears, and the atmosphere softens almost immediately. Memories seem incredibly vivid around this card. Little moments begin returning without invitation. A laugh they didn't appreciate enough. A conversation that seemed ordinary back then. The way you looked at them when nobody else really noticed how much they were struggling. Scorpio. It feels like your kindness is becoming much clearer from a distance than it ever was while they were living inside the connection. Sometimes people only understand consistency after experiencing inconsistency. Sometimes they only recognize loyalty after encountering disappointment somewhere else. Perhaps that's why your energy keeps resurfacing whenever they compare the people around them to the memories they still carry of you. Yeah, it feels like they are finally seeing something they overlooked. Not perfection, not fantasy, simply sincerity. There's a difference. Because sincerity cannot be manufactured. It cannot be copied. It either exists or it doesn't. The Hermit quietly closes this part of the reading, and honestly, I almost feel relieved to see it here. Instead of chasing distractions, this person seems to be spending more time alone with their own thoughts. Maybe not because they wanted solitude in the beginning, but because life somehow created enough silence that they could no longer avoid themselves. That kind of solitude changes people. It strips away excuses. It strips away noise. It even strips away the image we try to present to everyone else. What's left is simply truth. Oh my God, I get the sense they're beginning to realize that what they once called freedom may actually have been avoidance. What they once believed was confidence may have been fear wearing a different face. It's almost as though they're meeting themselves for the first time without needing anyone else's approval to define who they are. Scorpio, your name seems connected to that awakening in ways they probably never expected. Not because you forced them to change, not because you demanded anything from them, but because your presence quietly challenged them to become more honest with themselves. Sometimes the people who transform our lives aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones who hold up a mirror without judgment and simply allow us to see who we've become. It feels like that's exactly what happened here. The more they sit with their own thoughts, the harder it becomes to deny one simple realization. The version of themselves that listened to everyone else slowly drifted away from what truly mattered. The version that's beginning to emerge seems much more willing to admit that losing someone genuine leaves a different kind of emptiness. Perhaps this realization didn't arrive all at once. Perhaps it unfolded one quiet day after another. Either way, something inside them appears to be shifting, and for the first time in a long while, it feels like they're no longer searching for answers everywhere else. They're finally looking in the one place they should have trusted from the very beginning, their own heart. The tower arrives with an energy that is impossible to ignore. This doesn't feel like one dramatic moment that changes everything overnight. It feels more like a series of unexpected events that slowly begin removing every place this person used to hide. The routines that once distracted them don't seem to work anymore. The excuses that sounded convincing before suddenly feel empty. Life itself seems to be asking them a difficult question. How much longer are you going to keep pretending you're fine? It feels like the walls they carefully built around their emotions are starting to crack. Maybe something ended unexpectedly. Maybe certain relationships around them no longer feel stable. Maybe people they once depended on aren't showing up the way they used to. Whatever form it takes, these changes seem to be exposing truths that have been waiting underneath the surface for a very long time. What's interesting is that every time one part of their life becomes uncertain, their thoughts somehow drift back to Scorpio. Not because they're trying to force those memories, it almost feels automatic, as though your energy became the one place their heart still recognizes when everything else feels unfamiliar. Judgment appears beside the tower, and the atmosphere shifts into something much quieter. This isn't about outside voices anymore. This feels like an inner conversation they've been avoiding for far too long. I get the sense they're beginning to hear themselves with an honesty that wasn't possible before. Yeah, this person seems to be realizing that some of the hardest lessons don't come from losing success or comfort. They come from recognizing the moments we abandoned our own truth. Perhaps they're looking back at conversations they never finished. Perhaps they're remembering opportunities they let slip away because fear seemed easier than vulnerability. Oh my God, there is something incredibly human about this energy. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they may slowly be asking, "What was life trying to show me?" That's a completely different perspective. The questions become less about blaming circumstances and more about understanding the person they've become along the way. The death card follows naturally, and honestly, this feels much gentler than people often imagine. I'm not sensing endings for the sake of endings. I'm sensing someone who can no longer carry an old version of themselves without feeling exhausted. It's almost like they're standing in front of a doorway, realizing they can't walk through it, while holding everything they've been carrying for years. Old fears, old pride, old habits, old defenses. Somewhere deep inside, they seem to understand those patterns protected them once, but they may also have kept genuine love at a distance. Scorpio, it feels like your connection awakened something that refused to fit inside the life they had been living. Maybe that's why everything feels so uncomfortable for them lately. When your soul begins asking for growth, staying the same often becomes harder than changing. Okay, this transformation doesn't look easy. It seems messy. It seems emotional. It seems filled with moments where they question whether they're strong enough to keep going. Yet something keeps encouraging them forward, even during days when progress feels painfully slow. The Nine of Swords carries the weight of those sleepless hours. I almost picture someone lying awake long after everyone else has gone to bed, staring into the darkness while their thoughts refuse to settle. They replay conversations that can't be changed. They imagine different choices. They wonder how life might look today if they had trusted their heart instead of their fears. Maybe they've tried distracting themselves. Maybe they've buried themselves in work. Maybe they've surrounded themselves with noise. Still, when everything becomes quiet, Scorpio seems to find a way back into their thoughts. Not as an obsession born from fantasy, more like an unfinished chapter that quietly asks to be read one more time. There is another feeling that keeps coming through here. They're beginning to understand that wanting you isn't enough. Loving someone isn't always enough either. The version of themselves that once avoided difficult conversations, ran from emotional responsibility, or allowed fear to make important decisions may no longer be the person they wish to remain. That realization can feel overwhelming because real change asks for action, not just intention. It feels like they're seeing that if they truly hope to stand beside someone like Scorpio again someday, the work has to begin within themselves first. No one else can do it for them. No one else can carry that responsibility. The cards almost whisper that this journey isn't really about winning someone back. It's about becoming someone they can finally respect when they look in the mirror. Perhaps that's the greatest challenge unfolding in front of them. Not learning how to love Scorpio. Learning how to become the version of themselves that no longer runs away when love quietly arrives. The lover steps into the reading with such a quiet certainty that it almost changes the entire atmosphere. This doesn't feel like someone wrestling with confusion anymore. It feels like someone who has finally stopped arguing with their own heart. For so long, they may have searched for reasons to explain away this connection. They questioned the timing. They questioned themselves. They questioned whether these feelings would eventually disappear if they waited long enough. But instead of fading, everything seems to have become clearer. There is something deeply peaceful about this realization. Not easy, not comfortable, just honest. I get the sense this person has reached a place where denying what they feel requires more energy than simply admitting it to themselves. Perhaps they haven't spoken these words out loud yet. Perhaps nobody around them even knows what's happening inside their heart. Still, it feels like an invisible decision has already been made somewhere deep within them. Scorpio continues to occupy a space that nobody else has been able to fill. Not because you're perfect. Not because every moment between you was without challenges, but because the connection seems to have touched something authentic inside them, something they can no longer pretend never existed. Temperance arrives so gently beside the lovers that it almost feels like taking a slow breath after carrying tension for far too long. Yeah, there is healing unfolding here, but it doesn't seem rushed. It feels patient, almost as though this person has stopped trying to force life to move according to fear and has started allowing themselves to grow at their own pace. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's simply waking up one day and realizing you're no longer interested in becoming the person you used to be. That seems to be happening here. Old emotional wounds that once controlled their reactions are beginning to lose some of their power. They may still have difficult days. They may still question themselves from time to time, but there is a growing willingness to face those emotions instead of burying them beneath distractions. Oh my God! I keep feeling that they are becoming softer with themselves. For someone who may have judged themselves very harshly in the past, that's a significant change, because self-compassion often opens the door to compassion for others as well. The King of Cups quietly settles into the reading, and I have to say, Scorpio, this energy feels incredibly mature compared to where this journey began. Emotional depth is no longer something they seem afraid of. Instead of seeing vulnerability as weakness, they're beginning to recognize that real strength often comes from allowing yourself to feel what you've been avoiding. Perhaps this person isn't trying to impress anyone anymore. Perhaps they're no longer interested in pretending they have everything figured out. There is something incredibly attractive about that kind of honesty. It feels grounded. It feels genuine. It feels like someone who is slowly learning that protecting their heart doesn't always mean locking it away. I also get the sense they're thinking about how they showed up for you in the past. Not from a place of endless guilt, but from a place of understanding. They may recognize moments when they held back affection, moments when pride spoke louder than tenderness, or moments when silence created unnecessary distance. Those memories don't seem to exist only to make them suffer anymore. Instead, they seem to be becoming quiet teachers, showing them the kind of partner they truly hope to become. The Ace of Cups brings such a beautiful shift in energy. It feels less like a beginning created by excitement and more like a beginning created by emotional clarity. That's a very different foundation. This person seems to understand that love isn't simply about intense feelings. It's also about openness, presence, consistency, choosing honesty even when honesty feels uncomfortable. Scorpio, I keep feeling that your connection became the mirror through which they started recognizing their own emotional capacity. Before meeting you, they may have believed they understood love. After everything that's happened, it seems they're realizing there were entire parts of themselves they had never explored. Maybe that's why this connection continues to matter so much. It didn't simply introduce them to another person. It introduced them to another version of themselves, one that feels more patient, more emotionally available, more willing to listen instead of react, more willing to stay instead of disappear when things become complicated. There is still a quiet journey ahead, of course. Growth rarely happens all at once. Yet these cards seem to suggest that something important has already taken place beneath the surface. The uncertainty that once clouded their emotions has slowly given way to something much steadier. Whatever words eventually find their way into the world, it feels like those words will no longer come from fear or confusion. They will come from a heart that has finally learned the difference between protecting itself and closing itself off from the very love it has been searching for all along. The Knight of Cups enters the reading with an energy that feels surprisingly sincere. This doesn't feel like someone rehearsing beautiful words just to create a moment. It feels like someone who's finally realizing that if they truly want another chance, words alone won't be enough. There seems to be a quiet understanding growing inside them that apologies only matter when they're supported by genuine change. I get the sense this person has imagined this conversation more times than they could probably count. Maybe they've pictured sending a message only to erase it before pressing send. Maybe they've started writing something in their notes, wondering if there are even enough words to explain everything that has been sitting on their heart. They don't seem afraid of speaking anymore. They seem afraid that after everything that's happened, their words might not carry the weight they hope they will. Yeah, that's a very different kind of fear. It's not fear of rejection as much as it is fear of not being believed. Because somewhere inside, they know trust isn't rebuilt through promises, it's rebuilt through consistency. The Three of Pentacles quietly joins the reading, and I love the feeling this brings. This card carries an energy of partnership that seems much more grounded than fantasy. It feels like this person has stopped dreaming about what could have been and started thinking about what they would actually be willing to build if another opportunity ever presented itself. Perhaps they're asking themselves different questions now. Not, how do I win Scorpio back? But how do I become someone Scorpio can genuinely rely on? Those are two completely different intentions. One is centered around getting what you want. The other is centered around becoming someone worthy of protecting what matters. Oh my God, that shift feels incredibly important. Because it suggests this connection is no longer just awakening romantic feelings, it's inspiring personal responsibility. I also keep sensing this quiet desire to contribute instead of simply receive. Maybe in the past, they expected you to carry more emotional weight than they realized. Maybe they became comfortable with your patience, your understanding, or your willingness to keep believing in them. Looking back, it feels like they're beginning to recognize how much effort you invested while they were still trying to figure themselves out. That awareness seems to be changing the way they think about love. The Six of Pentacles appears, bringing an energy that feels beautifully balanced. There is something about equality here that keeps standing out. This person seems to understand that healthy relationships aren't built on one person giving while the other quietly receives. They require both people showing up, especially during the moments that aren't easy. I almost hear them saying to themselves, if I ever have another opportunity, I don't want Scorpio to wonder where they stand with me. That feels significant. Because uncertainty may have created too much distance before. They're beginning to see that emotional generosity isn't only expressed through grand gestures. Sometimes it's returning a phone call. Sometimes it's keeping your word. Sometimes it's choosing honesty before silence has the chance to create another misunderstanding. These realizations seem simple on the surface, but they often change everything. The Page of Cups closes this part of the reading with such a gentle energy that it almost feels like the first sunrise after a long season of storms. This card doesn't seem interested in perfection, it feels interested in sincerity. Perhaps the first conversation won't be flawless. Perhaps emotions will make their voice shake. Perhaps they'll struggle to find exactly the right words. But I don't think that's what matters most. What feels important is that the walls separating their heart from their voice seem to be growing thinner. Scorpio, I keep sensing that this person no longer wants to hide behind pride. There may still be hesitation. There may still be moments when they wonder whether reaching out is the right decision. Yet underneath those questions, something softer continues to grow. A willingness to be emotionally transparent. A willingness to admit mistakes without immediately defending them. A willingness to say, I understand why you felt the way you did. That kind of honesty isn't always easy, especially for someone who once believed vulnerability would only make them weaker. Okay, there is one more feeling that keeps returning as these cards settle. It seems this person isn't only preparing to tell you how much you mean to them, they may also be preparing to show you that they've been listening to the lessons life has quietly placed in front of them. They seem to understand that genuine reconciliation, if it ever becomes possible, would begin long before the conversation itself. It would begin in the choices they make every single day, in the way they carry themselves, and in the quiet commitment to become someone whose actions finally speak with the same honesty their heart has been searching for. The Wheel of Fortune is the first card to reveal itself, and there is something about its energy that feels remarkably different from everything we've explored so far. It doesn't feel like someone waiting for life to make the decision for them anymore. It feels like someone finally understanding that every new chapter begins the moment they choose differently than they did before. I get the sense this person has reached a crossroads where repeating old patterns no longer feels possible. They may still carry memories. They may still carry regret. But those emotions don't seem to be keeping them frozen the way they once did. Instead, they seem to be quietly motivating them to become someone who no longer lets fear decide the direction of their life. Yeah. Sometimes the greatest turning points aren't loud at all. Sometimes they're born inside one silent moment when a person finally says to themselves, I don't want to lose another opportunity because I was too afraid to be honest. That feels incredibly significant here. Life seems to have placed enough experiences in front of them that they can finally recognize which roads only led them in circles and which road always pointed back towards something genuine. Justice follows so naturally that it almost feels like the heart and the conscience are finally standing on the same side. There is a quiet desire to bring balance where imbalance once existed, not because anyone forced them to, not because they feel obligated. It seems to come from a much deeper place. Perhaps they're realizing that every relationship teaches us something about ourselves. Some reveal our strengths. Others expose the places where healing is still needed. This connection appears to have done both. Oh my God, I keep feeling that this person no longer wants to carry the weight of unfinished truths. There may be things they wish they had admitted sooner, feelings they covered with silence, moments when vulnerability would have brought them closer instead of farther away. Looking back at those choices doesn't seem to fill them only with sadness anymore. It feels like those memories have become reminders of the kind of honesty they want to live by from this point forward. Scorpio, one thought keeps returning while I sit with these cards. Real accountability isn't about punishing yourself forever. It's about allowing yesterday to teach tomorrow. That seems to be exactly where this person is emotionally. The Ten of Cups brings such a warm and peaceful feeling into the reading. This doesn't come across as someone chasing excitement or temporary passion. It feels like someone longing for something stable, something they can come home to emotionally. They seem to understand that happiness isn't built from perfect moments. It's built from choosing the same person with sincerity, patience, and care over and over again. Perhaps they've started imagining a future that looks much simpler than the dreams they once chased. Not because they've lowered their expectations, because they've finally discovered what truly matters to them. a quiet evening with someone who understands them, conversations where they don't have to pretend, a relationship where both people feel emotionally safe enough to be completely themselves. For whatever reason, those images seem to keep leading them back towards Scorpio, not as an ideal, not as an illusion, but as someone whose presence brought a feeling they haven't been able to recreate anywhere else. The Lovers appears once more to close this journey, and honestly, it feels beautifully fitting. Throughout this reading, we've watched uncertainty slowly transform into clarity, fear slowly soften into understanding, and hesitation gradually become intention. This card doesn't feel like it's asking whether love exists. It feels like it's asking what someone is willing to do because love exists. That may be the most meaningful difference of all. Feelings can arrive without permission. Choices require courage. It seems this person is beginning to understand that opening their heart will always involve risk. There is no perfect moment that guarantees every conversation will unfold exactly as we hope. There is no certainty that the past can simply disappear. Yet there also comes a moment when remaining silent becomes heavier than speaking honestly. Maybe that's the lesson quietly unfolding here. Not that every ending becomes a new beginning. Not that every confession changes everything. Simply that living truthfully allows the heart to breathe again. Scorpio, if there is one message these cards seem to leave behind, it might be this. Some of the most important journeys we ever take happen entirely within ourselves, before anyone else sees the first step. This person appears to be walking that path, learning that genuine love asks for authenticity before anything else. They seem ready to release the versions of themselves that were shaped by fear, pride, and hesitation, making space for something far more honest to emerge. Perhaps that's why this reading feels so hopeful. Not because it promises a specific outcome, not because it guarantees exactly how the future will unfold, but because sometimes the hardest part of love isn't discovering what's in your heart. Sometimes the hardest part is finding the courage to let that truth become your voice. And perhaps that courage is finally beginning to awaken.